Syneto. Your data, our business.
Right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Rick Dudson. I'm the VP of Sales of EMEA for Syneto, and I'm joined by my colleague Dragos Karan, who's our VP Technical Marketing. So firstly and most important, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time and trouble to join Dragos and myself, but also some special thanks to Jerzy, Marcin and the team at our store for contacting you all to invite you to join this webinar. As I say, we hope the webinar will be very, very interesting indeed. Dragos will be leading that. We'll start off with, I'm sure you've all seen the agenda, but the Syneto data management platform. We'll be going through key product services, product overview and so forth, and going all the way through. I won't read the whole agenda out for you, but we'll be doing some demos as well, which I think will help you to see the power and the importance of this product in the SMB market space. Feel welcome to ask any questions as we're going through, or you may wish to keep them to the end. The choice is yours. We're happy to take questions as we go through, be they technical or commercially related. Otherwise, so I know some people sometimes prefer to write, they can be written, or alternatively, as a last choice, feel free to contact us and Jerzy and the team afterwards. So yes, thanks very much indeed. Hope you enjoy everything. I'll catch up with you at the end. And yeah, if I could hand over to yourself, Dragos, to lead the way. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Rick, for your introduction. And thank you all for taking the time to be here with us today. I promise you that this presentation will not be your regular webinar. It's going to be full of interesting information, and I'm going to show you not only a few things about what Syneto does, but also a few things about how the world is changing, and especially how IT is changing with regards to everything that's going on around us with this digital revolution. So my name is Dragos Karan. I'm in charge of technical marketing. That being said, please let me remind you that you can use the questions feature provided by this webinar software to ask anything of us during the webinar. We will gladly answer at the end. I'm going to be turning off the webcam just so that our connection would be better, and to make sure that everybody can see the presentation. So without further ado, let's look at the IT challenges that managers face right now, because I'm sure most of you are familiar with the fact that budgets are constantly shrinking. You are being asked to provide more functionality, more features with less risk, and to have more efficiency, to be more agile when the business or the market demands that new resources are being deployed. All of this on a shrinking budget. And at the same time, in order to be able to provide the IT resources that the company needs with less risk, more efficiency, and more agility, you need a simpler solution, because that is the only way to deliver it. So IT infrastructure today is basically constituted of the traditional mix of servers, switches, storage in the shape of either a network attached storage en masse, and the SAN, the storage area network that is connected to the servers in order to provide the capacity, the storage for the hypervisor and the virtual applications that are running on top of it. This is the siloed architecture of traditional IT infrastructures that we see today. It's every piece of the infrastructure bought separately and managed separately, which, if we go back a slide, is not really in sync with being more efficient, having less cost, less risk, and it's definitely not a simple solution. Now, adjacent to the main infrastructure, if you want to provide less risk, so have security over data, applications, provide business continuity to the business, you also have the added disaster recovery infrastructure, which is usually some DR servers, some networking with switches in between, a backup server where all the backups are being stored, and of course the backup repository that keeps all of these copies safe. So what are some of the issues with this type of traditional infrastructure that we've seen up until today? Well, as I mentioned, it's expensive to buy because you have to acquire every piece of the infrastructure separately. It is difficult to protect, as you would need to have a third-party backup software that would allow you to protect all of the applications and data in your IT infrastructure. And of course, being a bunch of different pieces of technology that have to interact together, they're complex to manage. You have to physically go into every single interface of every single product in order to be able to do your basic IT management tasks. Things like provisioning new resources for the company, monitoring the infrastructure, or in case something does go wrong, recovering any kind of application or data. This is on the side of the primary infrastructure. Now, if we look at the disaster recovery side, there are a few issues here, mostly related to it having a high recovery time objective, RTO. So by RTO, we mean how long does it take to get back to business, so to get back to providing the IT resources a company needs after something does go wrong. And for this traditional sort of approach, the RTO is pretty high. Right now in Europe, the average RTO for a traditional disaster recovery infrastructure is between 8 and 10 hours. So this means a full business day is basically lost if something does go wrong. Naturally, these disaster recovery infrastructures are storage inefficient. And by that, we mean that all these backups, all these copies of your data sit inertly for huge amounts of time without doing anything except being there in order to ensure that the data is protected and recoverable. So we looked at this and we thought how we could improve the life of IT managers in a way that is directly connected to their challenges. So how can we provide a solution that is less costly, that is more efficient, that is easier to use, and that allows IT managers to have less risk and more power in terms of their IT infrastructure. And this is our solution, this is our philosophy: to simplify, accelerate, and protect IT infrastructures. And this is what the Syneto data management platform does. It is the world's first IT infrastructure that is designed for this purpose, and that is designed to unify both what the primary infrastructure and the DR infrastructure do in a single platform that is able to deliver all of the IT services required by a company. So everything from virtual applications to data sharing to protection to disaster recovery in a single unified platform. And this is in fact our solution. It is a hyper-converged platform which is software defined. So our power lies in the software. Everything that is underneath in terms of hardware is industry standard stuff. And it is the only, let me underline this, it is the only IT infrastructure product and solution that you can buy out there today that has built-in data protection and instant disaster recovery. And part of the introduction to Syneto that we are going to do today, I think the most interesting part, will be a live demo of our products where you can see what we mean by hyperconvergence meets data protection and disaster recovery in the same platform. This is the way that we manage, through this union of hyperconvergence and disaster recovery on the same platform, we manage to deliver this solution that can give you high performance in terms of applications, that is cost effective because you do not have a bunch of different pieces of technology that need to be bought and managed separately. It has built-in data protection, so you don't need to worry about any of the data, be it application data or files on the infrastructure. It is extremely easy to use, as you will see in the demo. Basically, after doing this demo with me, you will be able to run and manage a Syneto infrastructure by yourself. And lastly, for the entire infrastructure, you have support from a single vendor. So it's not a case which you can usually find with traditional infrastructures, where if something doesn't work, you have to track down the issue between different vendors. One of them thinks it's a networking issue. The networking people think it's a storage issue. The storage people think it's a server-side issue. So with Syneto, you have one vendor support for the whole infrastructure stack. So if there is an issue, or you have a question, or you think something is not up to spec, then it is extremely easy to track down this problem, and you only have to contact one vendor in order to achieve this. At a technical level, Syneto works as a hyper-converged platform with built-in data protection and disaster recovery, as I mentioned. So on top of the Syneto appliances, which are engineered by our hardware wizards to be a perfect fit for European companies in terms of workload and in terms of performance and capacity. And over is Syneto OS. Syneto OS is where all the magic happens. It is the power that drives this software-defined IT infrastructure. And Syneto OS allows you to run virtual applications, as you'll see during the demo. It allows you to natively share files, and at the same time, it allows you to flexibly protect all of this data, so both applications and files, with thousands of backups. So basically, you cannot lose more than 1 minute of your data, no matter what. And at the same time, it allows you to granularly and flexibly send these backups, so replicate them to another Syneto unit that will be able to restart everything, the entire IT infrastructure, in case of a disaster, in under 15 minutes. And in fact, that is one of our promises, the fact that you can back up everything every time, that you can recover anything anytime, and if there is a disaster that warrants it, you will be able to recover the entire IT infrastructure on a separate Syneto unit in under 15 minutes. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Syneto solution. In terms of IT services, as I mentioned before, we provide all of these IT services, all of these services that a company usually needs in a single platform and with one single point of management for everything. Meaning compute, the ability to run and manage applications, meaning both file and block storage, so the SAN and NAS part of the traditional siloed infrastructure that I've shown you before. At the same time, you can back up and restore all of these data entities, both files and applications, and disaster recovery. And thanks to the way our data management technology, because this is a data management platform, works, we have introduced this, and we handle data management with a very modern concept of copy data management. And what this means is that instead of having a very storage and efficient disaster recovery infrastructure, what you have is multiple copies of the data that you can use at any given moment instead of letting them lie around without doing anything. And this allows you to also set up very flexible and very efficient testing and development environments, because you can quickly spin up any resources that you need. You can quickly spin up new virtual applications, and you can use the copies of the data from the copy data management concept to test multiple versions of whatever sort of application you are trying to build. So, as I mentioned, the power with Syneto is in the software, because let's face it, nowadays everybody can build hardware, and hardware is commodity. It's steel, iron, aluminum, silicon, everything bunched up together. But our power is in the software. Our power is in Syneto OS, and we have built Syneto OS from the ground up with the concept of one-click everything. Now, this may sound a bit of marketing talk, but what we mean by this is that we have focused our user flows and actions on the concept of making everything as easy to do as possible. For instance, if you want to monitor your IT infrastructure, the only thing you have to do is one click. If you want to provision a new data store for a virtual machine, you can do this with one click. Basically, out of our promise that we simplify, accelerate, and protect, this delivers on all three counts. It's simple. Everything is designed to be achievable with as few clicks as possible. And we did this by looking at what are the most common IT services that are in use by companies in Europe. As I mentioned, we built products for European companies, and with their needs in mind, we saw that these IT services are usually related to virtual machine management, to data protection, disaster recovery, storage, and networking. And then we connected these with our experience in terms of what actions does an IT manager usually do, and there's quite a limited number of them. So an IT manager will either be doing some monitoring of his infrastructure to look as a recurring task, to look at it and see if everything is working properly. He will either be provisioning new resources. This could be some space, a new data store for a virtual machine. This could be a new file share for a department in the company. It could be a recovery operation. Something might have gone wrong. From a logical perspective, somebody might have deleted something, or God forbid, somebody might have clicked on a dubious email and unleashed a ransomware. Or it might be a serious case of a disaster where something has gone wrong, part of the infrastructure is down, and they need to get everything running again so the business doesn't lose money. And this is the concept of one-click everything. It is IT services connected with IT manager actions, and all of this is built into Syneto OS. Now, Syneto OS runs on our products. They are the HYPERSeries. Inside the HYPERSeries, we have two appliances. Well, in fact, there's three of them that are designed in terms of size, workload, and pricing to fit with most European companies. The HYPERSeries 2000 is the entry-level unit. It is designed for use in, especially in remote offices or remote sites, and the HYPERSeries 3000, which has a higher workload, it has more capacity, and it is a perfect fit for infrastructures up to 50 virtual machines. But let's stop for a second and look at the positioning. So where does Syneto sit in the market? And the market, as it looks right now, has two sides. So on the lower side of the market, you have your sort of do-it-yourself, hyper-converged IT infrastructures. So these are infrastructures that you need to acquire the hardware separately. You just get the software, and then it's up to the IT manager to make it work with the hardware. The issue with these is that they are very complex to deploy. I don't know if any of you have ever seen a hardware compatibility list from one of these vendors. It's quite complex, so you have to spend a lot of time figuring it out. And if we go back to the challenges of the IT manager, it's risky. It's very risky because there is no guarantee that it is going to work properly or at all, or give you the amount of performance and protection that you need. And lastly, of course, there's multiple vendors involved. So you're going to get the hardware from one vendor, the software from another vendor, and it will be difficult to pinpoint where any of the issues would be. And on the other side of the market, on the upper side of the market, you have the big players. So the likes of Nutanix, SimpliVity's been acquired, but it's still a product. The likes of VxRail, which are very, very good products. Don't get me wrong; they do get the job done. The issue is that they only work for the Fortune 1000 companies. So the very big players that have extensive budget to acquire something like this, and who actually need it, because it's overkill for anything which is under, let's say, 40, 50 virtual machines in terms of workload. So you wouldn't need a scale out 3+ nodes infrastructure to run that number of VMs. And also the issue here is in terms of data protection and in terms of disaster recovery, because you would need a second cluster. So another set of 3 nodes that would constitute your disaster recovery infrastructure, which of course, if it was expensive before, then you can picture that in this scenario, it would be literally double the price. And in between this, these do-it-yourself software only and the top expensive overkill players in the market is Syneto. So we have found this completely empty space in the market in this range between 15,000 and 35,000 euros, where there is no other alternative. So it's a market that needs a simple, efficient, easy to use infrastructure that can provide all of the IT services with built-in data protection and disaster recovery to companies that are not Fortune 1000, but to most companies in Europe. And this is where Syneto sits in the market. Now, as I mentioned, the HYPERSeries has 2 options, so either the 2000 or the 3000, and the 3000 comes in 2 flavors. There's the HYPERSeries 3100 and the 3200. The main difference between the two is that on the 3200 you have multiple CPU choices, and you have 2 CPU sockets, and this allows you to put more RAM memory inside and basically have a higher workload in terms of the number of virtual machines that you can run. Now, of course, the question is, we looked where HYPERSeries and Syneto fit in the market, but who is the HYPERSeries for? And here we see that there are 3 types of situation, 3 types of customers for which Syneto is and the HYPERSeries is a good choice. So either in the first case, companies that are moving from physical servers to a virtualized infrastructure. This is usually a scenario where servers are physical, there's a networking switch somewhere, the storage is in the server, there's no separate data storage infrastructure, and there might or might not be a disaster recovery side of the infrastructure attached. Another scenario would be your classical server with a direct attached storage. This is usually a workload of between 3 to 20 virtual machines on the server with its storage directly attached. And for DR purposes, there might be a network attached, a NAS unit, network attached storage unit that can receive backups from something like a third-party backup software, think Veeam in this case, which is the most well-known. And finally, in the third scenario, this is the classic traditional infrastructure that most companies have that we've looked at the start of this presentation. And this is usually some servers. They might be redundant. There might be a couple of them running kind of the same workload with a SAN attached over either iSCSI or fiber channel, and a separate DR infrastructure with backup software or something like I mentioned Veeam or something like Acronis over it. And the HYPERSeries is a perfect fit to replace any of these scenarios, because it does everything that the servers with the SAN attached and the DR side. It does all of these inside a single platform with a single management interface, and there's no need to buy some more backup software. And also, as we will see during the demo and further in the presentation, the whole data protection and disaster recovery side is automated and instant and extremely easy to use. Now, in terms of workloads, the HYPERSeries can run everything that is considered a enterprise application, everything from SQL servers or Oracle databases, virtual desktops, applications for communications like email servers or SharePoint. You can also use it for development and testing with a bunch of applications, or it can also run, of course, virtual appliances like antivirus software or email filters or anything of that flavor. So how do you deploy Syneto and the HYPERSeries? And there are a couple of topologies, actually more than a couple of ways to deploy Syneto, and this is where you will see some of the flexibility. So you can either, and this depends on the type of company, the type of end user that the product gets delivered to, and depends on their needs. So you can either have a single site with a couple of HYPERSeries appliances that locally replicate data, so from one unit to the other for disaster recovery purposes. In this case, if Hyper1 would have an issue, you could be able to restart everything on the second HYPERSeries appliance. Now, for safety, you can take that one step further. You can have one HYPERSeries appliance in your primary site. This might be your headquarters, and you can have another Hyper unit as a secondary backup site, and then all the data, all the backups would be remotely replicated to the secondary Hyper unit. And in case something happens, you would be able to either recover data from there or restart. We call this concept DR play, restart the applications directly on the secondary Hyper machine. Of course, you can mix and match these. You can have a backup scenario in the primary site. So in your headquarters, you might have a couple of Hyper units that replicate between themselves and recover it that way. And for safety, you could have a third copy of the data on a third HYPERSeries unit in the secondary site. Also, a scenario that we see deployed a lot with customers is cross-replication. And this means that in this case, both Hyper units would have a running workload between themselves. So there would be virtual machines and file shares running on both of the Hyper units, and they would replicate backups between themselves. Now, in this scenario, if one of the units happens to have a problem, you could restart the applications that it had, its entire workload that it had running on the other unit. And returning to one point I made previously, you can do this in under 15 minutes without any issues. You can just restart them, and you will see this during the live demo part of this presentation. And finally, for the utmost level of efficiency, protection, simplicity, security, you can mix and match all of this. You can have a cross-replication scenario in your primary site and your headquarters. So a couple of units that replicate between themselves. Each and every one of them can cover for the other if something goes wrong. And you could have a third HYPERSeries unit in the secondary site that receives replicated backups from both of them, and which is able to restart the workload of any of the other units that are in the primary site. Now, these are not fixed topologies, so you can grow this as much as you like in terms of scalability. So you could have 6, 8, 9 units in the headquarters, or you could have a couple or 4 in the headquarters, and you could have multiple HYPERSeries in all of the remote branches. And we have customers who do this, especially companies that have production sites in many countries around the world, and they have a main infrastructure in the headquarters, and then multiple smaller HYPERSeries units in their branch offices who all send and all replicate backups to the headquarters. And in this case, if one of the branch offices has an issue, if the infrastructure goes down, they then have the ability to restart the workload on the main infrastructure in the headquarters and keep going as if nothing happened. So architecturally, this is what Syneto looks like. So over our Syneto appliances, over the HYPERSeries, be it a 2000, a 3100, or 3200, you have a VMware hypervisor running. Now, VMware is our hypervisor of choice. So this is the technology that we use in order to provide the hyperconvergence, the compute engine behind our concept of a unified infrastructure. So both hyperconvergence and disaster recovery. We chose VMware because it is the most stable and it is the most used hypervisor out there today. And going back to the challenges of IT managers, they want less risk. So this VMware is currently the probably the most friendly in terms of risk management hypervisor that there is. On top of everything, as a controller, VM runs Syneto OS. And what Syneto OS does through the use of our own proprietary technology is that it takes control of all of the hardware resources. So all of the disks, all of the compute, all of the memory, it takes them and uses them to provide these resources for VMs, for storage, for file sharing, for backup, for recovery, for everything. And we have our own technology that allows Syneto OS to talk to the hypervisor and take control of VM management operations. So we're talking everything from starting, stopping a VM, telling the hypervisor to quiesce, so to stop operations, so because a backup is taking place, and so on. And this is what allows us to do our magic of a built-in disaster recovery engine. This perfect intersection between control over the hypervisor and control over all the data, all the data blocks that get stored with our technology. As I mentioned during the slide about our solution, we want to simplify, accelerate, protect, and we deliver high performance. So what this means is that with Syneto, applications will perform faster compared to traditional solutions. This is due to many reasons, but mainly because of our unique flavor of caching technology that we use with Syneto OS. What we do is that, if you've noticed, probably not, but if you did, on the hardware specifications slide of the HYPERSeries, we provide a lot of RAM memory. And this is not only to hold the workload and the number of VMs, this is also because we make use of the DRAM layer, so the memory layer, for caching. So most of the data read operations will take place from the RAM memory, up to 90%. I'm going to show you this during the demo. And this means that they are very fast, because the fastest storage medium is RAM memory. We're talking nanosecond latency. And for the rest of the 10% of the writes happen on a secondary tier of SSDs, which are also very fast, so dedicated SSDs for caching. And only if a operation is either not very recently used or not very frequently used, only then will it arrive on the final storage tier, which is spinning disks that are very cost efficient but not that fast. So a few other things that allow high performance, of course, there is no network latency between the storage side and the virtual machines. Everything sits on the same platform, so there is direct access to the storage from the hypervisor, and there is no latency involved. And of course, for very performance demanding workloads, we provide all flash as a capacity option in order to provide the largest amount of performance. Now, moving on to the data protection side, and I don't want to keep you more, I want to show you the demo because that's the most interesting part. Because of our unique architecture, what we can provide is up to 1,440, so 1,440 automatic backups per day for every VM, with as little as 0.1% storage usage. So what we use in terms of technology allows us to create all of these local backups without using extra storage. We only flag the data blocks of a certain data entity, for instance, a virtual machine, as belonging to a backup, which means no extra storage is needed. At the same time, you can create it, and you're going to see this in the demo, you can create a backup in under 1 second. So you can say it's instant. At the same time, there's a bunch of technologies that work together to make sure that the data is consistent, that there's no silent data corruption, that if a backup takes place, the machines, the virtual machines, memory writing operations are stopped, so everything is consistent. Now, also connected to backups is our ability to recover, and our promise is that you can get back to business in less than 15 minutes. So if you replicate a VM to another Syneto unit, you can restart it in under 15 minutes in case something happens to the unit it was replicated from. Also, a restore is instantaneous, as I mentioned, for files, and a VM takes less than 1 minute, which you will see in the demo. So without further ado, let's move to the most interesting part of today's presentation, which is the live demo. So what we have here in front of us is the classic Syneto deployment. We have two units. We have a primary unit and a demo unit, which I will also, and a unit that we use for disaster recovery purposes. If there is any sort of slowdown in this demo, please excuse me. This infrastructure is approximately 1,500 kilometers away from where I am right now. So there might be a bit of latency because we have to go through so many networks. So this is the Syneto OS interface. Let me walk you through the dashboard where we are right now. There is, of course, the widget that allows you to monitor the amount of resources that are being used by the infrastructure in terms of CPU usage, in terms of memory, and in terms of storage. But allow me to point out the most interesting part. And here you can see the union between the concept of hyperconverged and the concept of data protection and disaster recovery, because the system can tell you at a glance how many virtual machines you have working right now. In this case, we are on the demo unit, so on the DR unit, so there are none. But if we look on the other Syneto unit, there are 5 virtual machines running. You can see how many data stores, so the storage backend that these virtual machines are using, or any data shares. And the interesting part is that the system knows if these VMs or file shares are protected or not. So if there is a data protection schedule that is working and that can allow you to restore these virtual machines or file shares to a state they had in previously in the past. Moving on, of course, we can learn more about the hypervisor. We can see what the state of our VMs is right now. 2 of them are powered on, 3 of them are off. There's none of them that are suspended. And we can see how much space we have saved. Now, as I mentioned, there are a bunch of things that we do in terms of efficiency. And one of the technologies that we use is something called inline data compression. And what this does is that it uses some of the compute power of the machine to compress data blocks as they are being stored. And what we usually see in 99% of cases is between 1.5 and 2 times more space saved by using this technology. So in this case, we have a total amount of 100 gigabytes of data which was stored, but thanks to the inline data compression, only 63 were finally stored. So we saved 35.7 gigabytes of data. So that's nearly half the data by using this technology. Now, as I mentioned, the high performance, you can see here the memory cache of the caching mechanisms that I mentioned before. So on this machine, 81% of data that is being read by VMs or anything else is directly from memory. So and this is the fastest storage medium, as I mentioned. So this is the fastest speed. 81% of the data gets read from here. Now, let me show you a bit about the one-click everything concept. So let's say that you are an IT manager. Let's say that you have a monitoring task every week. You want to see if your infrastructure is running properly. Now, with Syneto, all you have to do is simply click on the overall health widget, and the system automatically, so there's a bunch of automation going on in this concept of one-click everything, checks all of the different, so there's millions of data points throughout the infrastructure, and it checks everything from the software to the hardware to the hypervisor. It checks if everything works fine and delivers you this at-a-glance view of the health of the system. Are there any system errors? Is the CPU working fine? Is there other hardware working fine? How are the VMs doing? How are the sensors themselves doing? And if something would go wrong, you would see it here, and you could immediately take action. Now, most of the navigation inside the HYPERSeries with Syneto OS 4 running on top is done using the main menu on the left. There is another separate menu which is for things that are used more rarely. So things like networking configuration, or looking at the disks that are on the system, changing the time or the password. But what we're going to be using is the main menu on the left for today's demo. Let me keep going on the concept of one-click everything. So one of the tasks that IT managers often need to do is provisioning new resources. In this case, let's say that we want to provision a new data store. Now, data stores are the storage backend, so the storage that any VM needs to run. What we've done here is that we've created a data store for every virtual machine that is running on the system right now. This is not a necessity. You could have more than one VM running on a data store, but for ease of use, we advise this as a best course of action. Now, usually to create a data store, an IT manager would have to do a lot of things. He would have to provision it on the storage. He would have to then share it over, something like NFS to the hypervisor. He would have to go into the hypervisor, register it, and then it would be working. Now with Syneto, it's incredibly simple. Let's designate our new data store, test data store, and then simply with one click, the data store gets created. So all the magic happens in the background. Everything that I mentioned, so the data store gets created, it gets shared over to the hypervisor. Syneto OS tells the hypervisor, hey, there's a new data store for you. Look at it, and it is now ready to use. This can be now used to run other VMs without any issues. As I mentioned, the native file sharing capabilities of Syneto, I'm going to quickly walk you through them. You can natively create either SMB shares or AFP shares. SMB shares are, of course, a network protocol used for Windows, and AFP is for Mac. So if it's an Apple environment, then you can share files over AFP as a protocol. Again, creating something like this is very simple. You simply click on the new share button, you give it a designation. It would be test share. Now, you could set a quota for it, so set an amount of space, or you could leave it empty, in which case it would be thinly provisioned by default. And the system does everything automatically and, of course, nearly instantly. You can see here it's already accessible, and I will show you how to access it in just a bit. We also have a domain server, so Active Directory in this case, integration, where we are now, you simply have to input your Active Directory credentials, and all of the file shares that you create will automatically use permissions from your Active Directory in order to allow users to access it. Now, this is a hyper-converged infrastructure, so one of its main functions is to allow an IT manager to run and manage virtual applications. So let's move to the virtual applications page, the virtual machines page, sorry, again, using the intuitive main menu on the left. Now, as you can see here, we have a bunch of virtual machines that are running. This is your classic Active Directory server using Windows Server, or this, for example, is a Windows 10 machine. So let me quickly run you through what we have here. You have an at-a-glance view of the amount of resources that this VM is using in terms of compute, in terms of memory, in terms of space, and also because you have the built-in data protection feature, you can see the amount of protection that this VM benefits from. So as we can see here, this particular Windows 10 machine has a snapshot, a backup that is taken every day, and then these backups are replicated, in this case to the other unit which I've shown you. But this protection schedule is now paused. We will restart it as we go on with the demo. Other things that you can do here, you can learn more about where this machine is has its capacity, has its storage. In this case, it's on a data store, which has the same name for ease of use, as I mentioned. And you can also control this virtual machine. You can power it off, you can suspend it, you can reset it. But again, one-click everything simplicity. You can actually run and manage this VM directly from the storage, from the Syneto OS interface. So this is the VM of our friend. Sorry, just a second. Mr. John Smith. And as I mentioned, this particular VM is about 1,500 kilometers away from me. And you can do anything that you want here. You could simply, if you chose, you could access any kind of file share, or sorry, just a second. Like for instance, if you remember the file share that we created earlier, it's already here. Everything works, as I mentioned, one-click everything, so it's already accessible through the network via Active Directory. If we want, we can write something here, and everything. So, for instance, Mr. John here does not have permission to write in test share, but we could go into the Active Directory machine and give Mr. John Smith permission for this folder. Moving on, besides managing it, of course, the most important thing is to have all of this protected and recoverable in case something happens. So let's move to the protect and replicate part of the infrastructure, again using the main menu on the left. Now, as you can see here, there are the data stores that every VM has. There are the shares that can also be protected. For instance, we could choose to protect the test share that we did. There's nothing in it right now, so it's not of any worth. So let's look at our Windows machine. We can simply, if you have a lot of machines, you can use a lot of virtual machines, you can use the instant search feature to go through them. This is our Windows 10 machine that we were just logged on to. We use the data store as the main as the main entity that we are protecting, and we can see here that there is one VM running on this data store. Now, so it's been a while since this has had a backup. It's been 4 months. So let's look at the protection schedule. As I mentioned, protection on Syneto is very flexible and very granular. So let's edit this protection schedule. As you can see right now, it is set to take a backup every 1 day at 3 a.m. in the morning. It will keep 30 copies locally, and it will replicate these backups to the other unit, in this case demo DR, we are on demo primary, and it will keep 60 of the copies on the other unit. But let's say that this is a very important VM and we want a very aggressive backup schedule. Let's say we want to do a backup every minute. We want to keep 30 of them, so you have the last half hour of work locally, but we would also like to replicate these backups to the other units, to demo disaster recovery, and we'd like to keep 60 of them there to have the last hour of work. But you can configure this schedule as you wanted. You could have very quick backups every minute for an hour that are not replicated, and you could have a daily backup that is replicated every night, so that you will have an entire day worth of data that is saved off-site on another unit for safety. Of course, you can also encrypt these backups in case you are using a regular internet connection. You might want to encrypt them for safety. Now, that being said, let's simply start this schedule and see how it works. Now, as I said, this is nearly instant, so let's run it. It is now starting. It will take just a couple of seconds to create a local backup, and it will also, as you can see here, it has already started replicating this backup to the DR unit. What we use is incremental replication. So only data blocks that are new as compared to a previous backup get transmitted over the network, which means that you can do a lot of backups very quickly and replicate them because they don't use a lot of bandwidth. It's already done, so the backup has been taken, it has been replicated, and if we go back to the virtual machine screen, we will now see that this backup has taken place for the virtual machine, for our Windows 10 virtual machine. So again, one-click simplicity, one-click backup created, replicated. But let's say I want to recover this. How would I do that? It's very easy. You would simply need to click the browse snapshots, or we call these local snapshots backups. Because they are backups on the local HYPERSeries demo primary where we are right now. And what we did here, again for simplicity, we provide a very simple calendar view. So you can go on any of the days. Of course, we only did some backups today, but if we go back a few months, for instance, when the last one was taken, you can see it here. And it is still recoverable from way back then. And because we have a backup every minute, you can see that these backups are taken every minute. And I will show you how to recover them during the final part of this demo. There is one other thing that I want to show you before moving on, and that is the level of protection. Because as I said, backups of VMs using Syneto and the HYPERSeries are consistent. What this means is that you can set the level of protection according to the type of workload that VM is running. So for instance, this VM has a application consistent level of protection. But if we look at changing the level of protection, we can, if it's not very important, we can set it to crash consistent. What this does is it doesn't tell the hypervisor to stop the operations of that VM because we are taking a backup. So it might be a case where a VM is not important enough to do that. But we usually counsel the middle of the road, middle of the line approach, having it application consistent. In this case, when a backup is taken, Syneto OS tells the hypervisor to quiesce the machine. We take the backup and then it keeps going. Of course, for important applications, think a database with financial transactions where you can't afford to lose anything. You could do a live snapshot of the VM. This means that the backup will also contain the data that's in the memory, in the RAM memory of that particular VM. So if it's a database with important financial transactions, you can't afford losing them because that means you lost money. So that will be a scenario where you would use a live snapshot. Okay, so it is that easy. It is that easy to run, manage VMs, file shares, protect them, and replicate. So if we go to our DR unit now, as you can see, we are on HYPERSeries demo disaster recovery. Here, there are currently no running virtual machines. But if we go to the data stores page, we can see that the data store of our Windows 10 machine of our friend John Smith is here. It has been replicated. And you can see that the interface clearly tells you, again, ease of use, one-click everything. This data store has been replicated from Hyper Demo primary. So let's just simply open this data store. And you can see here, there are all the snapshots. But let's make this real. Let's make it a real scenario. So let's say that Mr. John Smith has an important document on which he's been working on with his entire department. It has some very important financial information. Again, sorry about the speed. This is thousands of kilometers away. So let's save this. Yes, I want to save. So we have this important document, but one of his colleagues, he's not very careful. So let me make sure the network is off. Yes, the network is off. One of his colleagues is not very careful. He opens the wrong email, and all hell gets unleashed. Unfortunately, this Windows machine has been hit by a crypto virus, and you know how many companies get this type of infection. It happened to Boeing a month ago, and Boeing is a giant company, so it can and does happen to absolutely everyone. So poor John Smith, what is he gonna do? So everything's encrypted, and this is actually WannaCry. So this is the actual crypto virus. That's why I made sure the network was off, because I don't want this to let this beast of a crypto virus loose in our network. And of course, all his important financial information is now mumbo jumbo. What are we to do? There's nothing we really can. I mean, we can go on this. We can go to the virtual machine and shut it off. Everything is now encrypted. So you would be thinking, with a traditional infrastructure, what am I supposed to do? Should I pay? Probably yes. But with Syneto, you can recover this instantly without paying anything. So we simply power it off. What we could do now, we could recover this VM locally, so on the Hyper Demo primary unit. But so I can show you the disaster recovery capabilities, I'm going to recover this on the DR unit. So we will simply go on our data store, browse all the backups, let's take the first one that was, or let's take the one from 1 p.m. And simply hit clone. Now, what this does is it looks at the data store, and the system is smart. It can recognize the type of data entity that's inside. And now it knows that in this data store, there is a virtual machine. So we're gonna clone it. It automatically adds the designation, so you know it's the clone of the backup of the time and date that the backup took place. Now, if you look at all of these operations on the screen, this is something that a IT manager would usually have to do manually. So it would retrieve the snapshot, it would share it with the host, so with the hypervisor, with VMware, it would create a separate data store. Once that's created, the cloning could take place. So all of these would be operations that the IT manager, who needs to do things faster, smarter, and on a smaller budget, would need to do manually. But on Syneto, with our one-click everything concept, everything is automated. And this will be done in very shortly. If we would have done this restore on the same unit that the backup was taken from, so not on the other Syneto unit, this would have been nearly instant. It would have taken a few seconds. As it stands, it takes a few minutes. But again, I want to show you how fast it is, how fast and how easy it is to recover from a logical error like ransomware or somebody deleting something. And I also want to show you how easy it is to recover a virtual machine from scratch in case of a disaster. I'm doing this because we don't have so much time. I've probably already kept you for too long. But the idea is that it's that easy. So that's it. The machine is now recovered. We can simply go on the virtual machines page. As we are now on the other unit, we're on Hyper Demo Disaster Recovery. There's only the one VM that we have created, as you can see. And we simply need to power it on. Now, of course, powering on a VM is it's not a slow operation by any means, but it takes the time it takes for a Windows machine to boot up. And in terms of what Syneto does here, of course, all of the caching and all of that technology works to speed up this machine. As you can see, it's already turned on. So let's log in and see what happened to Mr. John Smith's data. There we go. It's booting up. So unfortunately, I started a snapshot where our document was not yet created. But as you can see, we are back to the point in time that the snapshot, the backup was taken. And this is how easy it is to, one, instantly recover from any logical error, ransomware, accidental deletion, anything. And this is how easy it is to restart everything on another unit if the infrastructure goes down by any reason. So this basically concludes the demo that I had for you. This is how easy it is to run and manage a Syneto HYPERSeries appliance. It's with the one-click everything concept. So I showed you how to run and manage applications, how to provision storage, and how to do monitoring tasks. And I showed you how you can protect any virtual machine and also recover it after a disaster. One final thing I want to show you is the analytics page. And here, again, there are millions of data points. We collect all kinds of information. And this would help you if you had some performance issues. It would help you narrow it down. And you can add anything that you want here. There's a lot of graphs that you can run, and you can zoom in, zoom out, and change everything according to your needs. So thank you. That was it for the demo. In terms of what we are planning to do in the future, we are going to want to allow users to restore the drive from a backup, so they don't have to restart the entire virtual machine in order to recover a file. There will be a file manager and navigation capability inside Syneto OS, so you could simply go in and recover one file. Also, what is coming this year is automated disaster recovery. So this will mean failover plans, and you can build failover plans on a unit. And if you want to recover after a disaster, you will simply click one button, so one click everything, and all of the VMs would get resurrected from the backups. They would get started, registered in the network, so you wouldn't have to do anything. Also, as of right now, on Syneto, you cannot create the VM from the Syneto OS interface. You would have to go into the hypervisor. That is of course very easy to do, especially since most people are familiar with VMware. But by the end of this year, this will also be a capability. Now, closing this demo and this presentation, a bit about Syneto. We have been around since 2000, so we have a bunch of experience in IT, and we have over. So this slide is a bit old. Right now, we have over 900 customers in over 10 countries around the world. We have partners in over 8. Allstore is one of them. Again, my thanks for engaging with us and for making this possible. So as I mentioned, we've been doing this for quite a while. Since 2010, we have been building software-defined storage with advanced data protection and everything software-defined. And since 2015, we have taken this experience of software-defined storage and we took it to the next level with hyperconverged infrastructures to satisfy our vision to create a solution that can simplify, accelerate, and protect IT infrastructures for European companies, as we are ourselves a European company. These efforts have led to quite a few publications talking about us throughout the years, including Computer Weekly and Tech Week and Bloomberg and others. So with that being said, my thanks for your attention. Hopefully you have enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please use this time to issue them. We would gladly answer. Thank you very much. My name was Dragos Kioran. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me further, and I will leave it off to Rick for the closing statements. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Dragos. That was excellent. Hope everybody enjoyed that. I'm just going to finish by giving you some ideas and examples of where the Syneto products are successfully used. These are Dragos mentioned how many customers we have. This is just a selection. As you can see, there's 6 different vertical markets that we've highlighted here, but due to the flexibility and the power of the solution, it's by no means limited just to these. But I'm just going to highlight a few for you. As Dragos said, we have customers globally, but the main area of our customers, we're a European company, so we have a very strong European customer base. Starting from the left-hand side, let me just highlight some interesting ones for you briefly. LG and Ford, everybody has heard of. We don't power the entire LG and Ford infrastructures in Europe, but we do power them departmentally in Italy, and in fact you may have seen it's available from our website, our recent success story with LG. Silka is a company you may have heard of. They are one of the world's largest key manufacturers, and I know I recognise that name. When I asked why the guys at Syneto said, well, you probably got some of their keys in your pocket, Rick. One of great interest, which relates again to the topologies that Dragos was covering with you earlier, is just down a little bit on the left-hand side, there's Serioplast. Now, I'd be very surprised if you'd heard of Serioplast, but I'd equally be very surprised if you haven't heard of the next name, which is Coca-Cola. Serioplast are a bottling company, manufacture bottles. They do that on behalf of Coca-Cola, and they have 26 sites globally, which have Syneto machines in the factories at these different locations. The factories being built next to where the Coca-Cola is being produced, and they all replicate back to the head office, which is near Milan. So that's an example, a great example of how the smaller Syneto units are used in the local offices, but all the data is replicated back to the head office, and in the event of any issues with the local factory site, they can be up and running ASAP, as Dragos has explained, from the main site. Plus the main site's obviously got a copy of all the data. I won't keep you too long with these, but education research, we do a lot in education. You see the universities there. NREL is a very prestigious one for us. That's the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in the US of A. We said that we were global. That's another good example of us being global. Public sector, we do a lot in a similar fashion, the way Serioplast do. We're linked with the Italian military, with the Air Force there, various IT applications, SaaS, they're very well known. A couple more interesting ones to sort of finalize on. The Gleaner, that is a newspaper in the Caribbean. As you can see, we're truly global. Fnac is very upmarket electrical or electronics gadgets and equipment retail chain, very, very big in France, but they also have stores in Belgium, Luxembourg, similar, and you may well have seen them at the airport. Another company which is very much present at airports and things is Calcedonia. They're Italian beachwear company. And for those of you finishing off who are big on Champions League, I know we have the Polish teams in the Champions League, of course, and we've got the World Cup at the moment, but Noborascu is a name you may recognise because they are a sponsor of Juventus. So yeah, as you can see, we have a very extensive coverage, lots of different vertical markets and all sorts of different kinds of companies, public sector, everything, education. So it's one of the things with the Syneto solutions are they're exceptionally broad. They're not pigeonholed into certain areas. So as Dragos said, if you have any questions, feel welcome to ask them now or write them to us. But we hope that everybody's found the webinar, the content and the demos interesting and informative, and it's helped to show you what indeed a powerful, flexible and complete solution HYPERSeries is, and how we believe, and hopefully you can see this now as well and believe it, that the HYPERSeries could help your customers and provide all of the data services they need, along with this built, very, very important these days, built-in backup and DR, and finally, and most importantly, how very simple and easy it will be for them to use and benefit from the products and its facilities. So yeah, thank you very much indeed. Any questions, we'll be happy to take them. And we hopefully look forward to working with yourselves and with Jersey and Marcin and the team at our store to uncover some opportunities, work on some projects with you, and all win some business. And hopefully we can get some success stories on that slide that I just showed you from Poland. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dragos.
Yeah. Thank you on behalf of myself and the entire team. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. So I see that there are no questions at the moment. I hope that everything was as clear as possible. If there is anything more you would like to find out, you can get in touch with Alstore, or you can contact us directly using the information on the screen. Again, many thanks for your time, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you, Dragos.
Syneto. Your data, our business.